So, welcome everyone. We've got a little bit of a different setup today with Councillor Scales and myself being online. So bear with us and we'll see if we can do the best we can. But we'll start the meeting with an opening prayer. So if we're going to be upstanding, I'll sort of stand a bit. Almighty God, we ask that you be present at this meeting to assist us in our service to the community through local government. We pray that our decisions will be wise and taken with goodwill and clear conscience. Amen.
Amen.
2 councillor and officer presence at the meeting. We have all councillors in attendance. Apologies and granting of leave.
Mr Mayor, we have an apology from our Director of Corporate and Organisational Development, Emma Woolston, and also from our Director of Infrastructure and Environment, Rachel Gadd.
Thank you very much. Disclosure of conflict of interest for number 5, confirmation of minutes. Someone like to move recommendation on the minutes of the Wednesday, 22nd June. Councillor Dick Shay.
I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder. Councillor Anderson, I'm just going to have to, hang on, I can probably pull you across a little bit. Was that you put your hand up? I missed that one.
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. All in favour? Carried. Petitions and joint letters?
There are none.
Public question time.
Mr Mayor, we do not have any questions for this meeting.
Thank you. Informal meeting of councillors.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Number 8.
Just to correct the record, the meeting dates were the 8th and 22nd of June and also the 13th of July, and the meeting records have been distributed prior to the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification? Someone like to move? Recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the information be noted.
Thank you, Councillor Wortman. A seconder. Councillor Dick Shay. All in favour? Carried. 9, organisational improvement. 9.1, property and regulatory system tender.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Calling our CEO, I guess.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this report was prepared by Emma Woolston, and neither Emma nor myself have a general or material conflict of interest in any matter to which the report or advice relates. As you're aware, since 2019, we have been collaborating with Alpine and Indigo councils to build a common digital platform with a focus on modernising our IT systems. One of our key platform requirements is for a common planning and building system to replace the legacy system that we currently have in place. In August 2021, the 3 councils issued a tender to assess the market for a contemporary suitable vendor. The tender also sought quotations for a system encompassing property, rating, receipting and animal management, and a suitable system for these purposes was also selected and has now been implemented. For your information, the tender has been conducted in accordance with the requirements of Council's procurement policy, and a vendor recommendation is presented for Council's consideration. The system Greenlight provided by eVis Proprietary Limited was the preferred solution due to providing fully cloud-based access, enabling staff to use it from anywhere, also removing the need for local technological infrastructure, a very fast system performance, built-in integration to mapping and reporting systems, with also having integration to the new rates, property and animal management system council-wise. They've also had successful implementations at 14 reference councils in Victoria and 4 reference councils in New South Wales. The pricing was competitive, and we've also conducted some reference checking, which was adequate. So this report that you have before you actually recommends the awarding of a contract for the implementation and licensing of a planning and building system, which will replace our legacy system that we currently have in place. There is a lengthy recommendation before you for your consideration. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Councillors, any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Wortman.
Mr. Mayor, not so much a question, I'd just like to make a statement. In the report, it just says that, adopting this system across the Alpine, Indigo and Tauranga Shires provides benefits and enables sharing of resources and learnings. And I'd just like to thank the staff from all the councils for collaborating together to implement this. And it has the potential for expansion of shared services across our shires into the future. So, yeah, I'd just like to thank the staff for working together to get this outcome.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. Any other questions or clarification? Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation as presented.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. A seconder? Councillor Scales. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Nine point 2, Audit and Risk Committee appointment. Our CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this report has been prepared by Emma Williston, and neither myself nor Emma have a general or material conflict of interest in any matter to which this report or the advice relates. As you're aware, our Audit and Risk Committee comprises a minimum of 3 members, 1 councillor and 2 external independent representatives. Until recently, the committee had 4 external independent members, and that's provided good continuity to the committee as well as a diversity of experience. Following the completion of the term of the independent member, Mr. Rob Lees, in October 21, we commenced a recruitment process, which myself and the Mayor have been facilitating. We had a very strong field, which was absolutely delightful and quite unusual for us in terms of seeking audit committee members. And it was quite a difficult decision for us, but the Mayor and I have come to a point where we would like to recommend that Ms. Lisa Forsyth be appointed to the Audit and Risk Committee for a 4-year period from 1st of August 22 to the 31st of July 2026. And I might throw to the Mayor in case there are any further comments in relation to this candidate.
What I'd like to add there, and Juliana touched on it, was the quality of the candidates was quite outstanding, and Lisa will be has a great knowledge and background in risk, and so she'll be a great asset to the Audit and Risk Committee. So I believe we'll be very lucky to have her. Any further questions or clarification? No. Would someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you. I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder? Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 9.3, corporate and organisational development. Call on our Director of Corporate and Organisational Development.
I might stand in for our director today, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yes, good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report again was prepared by Emma Williston, our Director of Corporate and Organisational Development, and neither Emma nor myself have a general or material conflict of interest in any matter to which this report or advice relates. Councillors, this is the quarterly update on the activities of the corporate and organisational development area. And I think you can see from the report that's been provided, there are a significant number of activities taking place across the organisation. I would like to highlight one activity in particular, and that was the implementation of our new rates, property, receiving and animal management system. And that was implemented across our council and Indigo. It's a fairly significant undertaking, and it was a 6-month process to get to the point of actually flicking that switch to go live. And I'd like to acknowledge the significant effort that's been put in by the finance team in order to get to that point. Certainly provide great benefit to our organisation going forward. And it was certainly a lot of long hours over and above their normal work commitments to get that implemented. Continually challenged by staffing levels, and I think that's an issue that many councils and many organisations are experiencing at this point in time. But the team continues to work really hard to deliver the activities that we've reported on. This report is for noting, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have some.
Any questions or clarification, councillors? Councillor Wortman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'd just like to make a comment on this report. I just note that the vendor was highly complimentary of our data integrity and with very few issues encountered with migrating the data to the new system. And he just said that, and the staff were very up to date and made the migration transition very well.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. Any further? I'd like to move recommendation. Councillor Anderson, is it? Yes.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to report that could we please have the report noted? Sorry.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. A seconder. Councillor Wortman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. On 9.4, performance reporting graphs. Take them as read. Any questions or clarification? Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the report be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. A seconder. Councillor Dickshay. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Well, have I hit the right spot? 9.5, data action sheet report.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this is the report that we provide on a monthly basis to show you the progress on the items, the action items from the previous council meeting, and I'm pleased to report that 8 of the 11 items from the June meeting have now been completed, and the remaining 3 are in progress. The recommendation is that the report be noted.
Any questions or clarification on that report, councillors? Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay,
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the report be noted.
thanks Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder? Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 9.6 council plan priorities. Calling our CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this is the standing report that we provide to you to update you on the progress against our council plan priorities. It's really hard to know where to start. I think you'll note from the report the significant number of projects and activities that are underway currently. We'll note that there are none of the priorities are showing as high risk in terms of non-completion, which is pleasing. And I think you'll be able to see that there's been a fairly significant amount of progress made over the last 6 months or so. I would recommend that we come back shortly to review the council plan priorities, given that the council has nearly been in place for 2 years, that we would then go back and have a look at those priorities and make sure that they're still in accordance with what it is that you're trying to achieve as a council over the remaining period of your term. So I won't speak to anything in particular. I think it's already been highlighted in a number of the reports today that there's been some really significant achievements made by the team. Thank you.
Questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I noticed under land use planning that there's a number of items that are listed for being dealt with in the future, and I'm just interested to know if we think that they're still achievable within the term of this plan.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay.
Through
Yep.
you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Dick Shay. We continue to watch with a close brief on whether we're able to do some of the work. And as part of the mid-year council plan review, we will be addressing possible options as to how that could be completed and whether there's an opportunity to either delay them or think about other options to do that. In some cases, there's some information that relates to existing projects, particularly around structure plans, that may mean that we get more traction on some of those projects than others. But that's a decision that's still sitting with DELWP as a decision maker about what can and can't be included in those projects.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or clarification? Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the report be noted, and I'd like to add a second point, if I could, that a review be conducted, a half-term review be conducted of the outstanding items in the council plan.
Did we
In the next 2 months. In the next 2 months. No?
October, November.
By the 30th of October.
Thank you. Got that noted. PA, CEO. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 10.1 bushfire relief and recovery update. Calling on our Director of Community and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this report is a quarterly report that provides an update on the progress of the formerly Relief and Recovery Department that has now been assumed back into our Community and Planning Department as of the 1st of July. And it just gives you an overview of some of the key quarterly events. Particularly this quarter, we held a number of major events, so 4 major events. And also we have attached the Municipal Recovery Plan update and a short summary of also the recovery activities that have been completed through the quarter. The recommendation is that the report be noted.
Thank you. Questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to ask the director, how's the transition to your directorship gone?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think so far actually very well, and I think there's some real benefits, particularly from a timing perspective. I think it was good timing to have the teams really start to work together, particularly as some of the recovery activities around COVID and bushfires continue to coalesce, and some of the other risks, particularly around things such as foot and mouth, bring all those different teams together. I think there's a real opportunity for some really strong collaboration. So, and fabulous to hold on to some of the existing recovery staff within the team as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions or clarification? Councillor Dick Shay.
More of a comment, Mr. Mayor. I was fortunate enough to attend several of those community events, and they were fantastic.
Yep, very good. Someone like to move a recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the report be noted.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Dick Shay. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 11.1 recreational strategy. Our Director of Community and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is about formalising the adoption of or proposing the adoption of the recreation strategy. The recreation strategy was funded as part of Sports and Recreation Victoria, and we see it as a key document to help us have a guiding framework for the prioritisation of ongoing upgrades and improvements to all of our recreation activity, and recognising the importance of participation in recreation for all ages and stages across the Shire. The actual plan was originally presented to you previously and has since gone out to community consultation. We received some formal feedback as part of that consultation process in terms of the draft plan. The first one was around having a stronger focus on equestrian facilities, which was part of the plan and is certainly something that, as an ongoing strategy, we've already started to prioritise within our investment around sports and recreation, and particularly in the latest Sports and Recreation Victoria, where we had a bit of a focus on equine opportunities. There was also some feedback around some of the balances around sports, around football and netball, and we feel as though the strategies pretty clearly demonstrates that there is quite a lot of diversity, and that football and netball is not necessarily the highest priority across the board for all ages and stages, and that that's an important consideration for us around how we address investments moving forward. And the last was a comment around a concern that the Corrion pool was closed more often than it was not. An analysis of our 2021-22 season, it ran in total for 127 days, and as part of that it was closed for 3.5 days due to COVID, which may be unfortunate for the community, but is an incredible outcome given the level of pool closures that had across the northeast that were far more significant than that. As part of the feedback, one of the questions we asked respondents is whether they felt that the actual strategy would assist not only them as a group to advocate for improvements, but also help support council. And there was a resounding yes to that question in terms of the feedback. Since we put the strategy out for comment, we have received some feedback, particularly around just how some of the framing around the ownership of some of the reserves and some of the sporting facilities are perhaps framed in the document, and particularly draw your attention to page 23, where it says Tauranga Shire Council maintains, and it goes on to explain what the reserves and other things. We thought it was incredibly important that we needed to make it clear that we do that in partnership with existing sports and recreation sports clubs and groups. So we're proposing that that is something that should be included as a small amendment to the final strategy document. The other thing that has come out as part of the consultation process is the inevitability of the fact that things change within reserves, committees of management, new reserves, new playgrounds, things like that. And that we wanted to recognise that this document is not necessarily a fixed in time document, that it should need to change over time. So the recommendation, aside from the amendment as outlined on page 23, is that the report be that the recreation strategy for Tauranga Shire. Sorry, where is it? Recommendation. Sorry, I'm on my tiny version. The recreation strategy for Tauranga Shire 2022 to 33 be adopted.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure that it can be answered today, but regarding the closures at Corrion Pool, is it possible that there was some other closures relating to weather events from the COVID that may have created the impression that it was closed more than 3.5 days?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can take that question on notice and clarify. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Something else, Councillor Dick Shay.
Also, on a similar vein, is there any? Do we have an update on lifeguard training to address the issue for next summer for all our pools?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes.
Yeah.
Next council meeting, we intend to put a detailed paper to you regarding the options in relation to the swimming pools. So we've done a range of requests for a quote and other pieces of research around what the options might be for next year to try to offset some of the risks. So that will be coming to the next council meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Wortman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think we all realise what an important body of work this is. This document will be a reference for when we are supporting our funding applications for future projects. And yeah, I just compliment everyone on such a great report.
Any further questions or clarification? Councillor Dick Shay.
I'd just like to echo that. I think, Joe and whoever else has helped him has done a great job in a pretty short period of time, getting around all over the place. I've seen some of the work and the meetings he's had to do, and I think, as Councillor Wortman said, it's going to be a very useful document for us.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. Someone like to move a recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay.
I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder, Councillor Wortman. Anyone opposed? Oh,
Yeah.
Councillor Wortman.
Could I just add an amendment to that recommendation? If councillor Dixon agrees.
So we could move and second the original
Yep.
recommendation, and then you could move an amendment and have that seconded, and then that forms the
Righto.
forms the motion, or you could move a second resolution if you preferred rather than amendment.
Which way would you like? Would you Councillor
Well,
Dixon?
Can I unmove?
You haven't got a seconder at this point.
Yeah, so I'm happy to hear what councillor Walkman's motion is, proposed new motion is.
So without a second, do we let that one lapse?
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, councillor Dixon. I just wanted to add one point, that the recreation strategy be adopted and the strategy be reviewed annually.
We've got a new recommendation. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Scales. Anyone opposed? All those in favour? Carried. (12.1) Asset Management Report. We're calling on our CEO.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we don't actually have a report for that item, and that'll be at a subsequent meeting.
Or will we? Yes, we provide in August. 13.1 Land Use Planning. Director of Community and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a monthly report on the planning permit activity for land use planning for the month of June. So in the month of June, we received 10 new applications and 13 permit applications were decided to the value of $1,067,726. As part of the current work, you'll note that we really started to get on top of planning, and super excited that we're really on track given the challenges of planning across the state. We're also still receiving quite a number of customer inquiries, particularly general ones often about wanting to purchase or do new developments. So exciting that there's obviously still some appetite, particularly with economic conditions, for people to look into that. In addition to the existing business as usual statutory planning services, we also continue to run the bushfire rebuild services. And I can confirm that at this point in time, we've received 24 applications for rebuild of dwellings, some of which didn't need a planning permit. And there's 31 in total planning permits that have been approved for dwelling rebuilds. And that's including some that weren't primary places of residence. So homes and things like that. We're not tracking them as primary places of residence, in case you're wondering what the difference is. At this stage, we also are expecting there may be 2 people that don't rebuild for various reasons. The recommendation is that report be noted.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Happy to move that the report be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Scales. A seconder? Councillor Walkman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. (14) 14.1's the Environmental Sustainability Report is presented quarterly. The next report will be provided in August 2022. 15, Economic Development and Tourism report is presented quarterly. The next report will be in August 2022. 15.2 is the Economic Development and Agricultural report is presented quarterly. The next report will be provided in August 2022. Councillor reports. No councillor reports have been received. Urgent business.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce an item of urgent business, please. The item of urgent business is council response to the potential incursion of foot and mouth disease.
So thanks, Councillor Scales. Do we need a seconder to Councillor Wortman? Anyone
Yeah,
opposed? Do we pass that to move it in, or do we debate it now?
I'd like to second that we allow the motion
Yep.
to be debated. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. All in favour? Carried. Urgent business, Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to highlight, obviously, agriculture is extremely significant in Tauranga Shire. There is the potential threat of foot and mouth entering Australia and the devastating impacts that it will have on all of agriculture in Australia and Tauranga Shire. I'd like to move a motion that officers present a report to our next council meeting on council's efforts in an emergency situation that foot and mouth disease does incur into Australia and indeed Tauranga Shire.
Someone like to second that motion? Councillor Wortman. Any further? Well, I'll ask, is anyone opposed? No? All in favour of that motion? Carried. CEO, Juliana.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just for the information of council, our team have actually been working behind the scenes, and there is a verbal briefing being provided this afternoon to our workshop by our Director of Community and Planning, and we'll subsequently prepare the report that has been requested.
Thank you. Perfect. 18 committee minutes. We don't have any. 19 occupational health and safety. CEO.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. You may wish to take this as read, yes?
Yep. Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that report, councillors? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the unconfirmed Occupational Health and Safety Committee minutes be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Wortman. A seconder. Councillor Dickshay. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 21.1. So we're sealing of documents.
Mr. Mayor, I think we need to do item 20.1, policies.
There we go. We skipped straight past that one. 20.1 policies and review for review and adoption. The following policy is tabled for review at Appendix 10, and which is community engagement policy, and there are two policies presented to Appendix 11 for adoption, which is access to waste disposal and recycling outlets and asset management. Any questions or clarification on policies? Someone like to move a recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the access to waste disposal and recycling outlets policy and the asset management policy as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder? Councillor Scales. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Now we're up to 21.1 or 21, sealing of documents. 21.1, Section 173, agreement with Town Shire Council and Cudgewa North Pastoral Proprietary Limited. Is our Director of Community and Planning want to speak to these?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Today we have three Section 173 agreements, and I'll treat them each separately because they have their own independent recommendations. The first is between Tarawong Shire Council and Cudgewa North Pastoral Proprietary Limited. Under the Tarawong Planning Scheme Provision 52.17, Cudgewa North Pastoral Proprietary Limited removed excessive native vegetation from property and roadsides in Cudgewa North. The proposed Section 173 agreement has been constructed under the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to secure the future use of the remediation site for revegetation, and that will include registration of this on title. The recommendation is as noted.
Thank you. Do we have questions or clarification? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendation as we presented.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wortman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. We now move to 21.2, which is very similar, but with Tarawong Shire Council and Sally Ann Buell. Again, call on our Director of Community and Planning.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This Section 173 agreement is between Tarawong Shire Council and Sally Ann Buell. Under the Planning Scheme Provision 52.17, Robert Buell, who is in a relationship with Sally Buell, who is the landowner, removed excessive native vegetation in Walwa. A Section 173 agreement has been constructed under the Planning Environment Act 1987 to secure the future use of the remediation site for revegetation. The recommendation is as presented.
Thank you. Again, any questions or clarification? Would someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Wortman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Wortman. A seconder. Councillor Dick Shay. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 21.3, Section 173 agreement, Town Shire Council and Gregory James Charlson. Then call on our Director of Community and Planning.
Once again, this 173 agreement has been prepared under the Tarawong Planning Scheme Provision 52.17 for Gregory James Charlson, who removed excessive native vegetation from property in Walwa. A Section 173 agreement has been constructed under the Planning Environment Act 1987 to secure the future use of the remediation site for revegetation. The recommendation is as presented.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that one? Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Dick Shay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. Seconder. Councillor Wortman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Confidential? Nothing for confidential? Thank you very much. Declare the meeting closed.